A quiet town erupts in fire under a summer night sky. An outcast cowboy carries a lifeless little girl through the flames. The schoolhouse collapses. A wild mustang screams into the smoke. A ruthless land baron vows, "I'll burn Copper Creek until it's mine." And in the blaze, the townsfolk must decide, follow fear or stand with the man they once cast aside. Dawn will come, ashes will settle, but within the ruins lies a secret, a letter, a choice, a hope that could change everything. From ashes to hope, this is the journey of a cowboy, a widow, and a wild mustang who dared to defy the fire. It began with a night too dry for dreams. Copper Creek thought itself safe, resting under the hush of stars, but the valley was holding its breath for judgment. What came was more than fire. It was betrayal set ablaze, a test of who would rise and who would turn away. If you've ever wondered whether a man scorned by his own town, a widow who still believed in kindness, and a wild mustang no one could bridle could save a place destined to burn, this is their story. If it stirs something in you, leave a word in the dust below and walk with us through every spark. Perhaps subscribe so no ember of this tale is missed. Copper Creek slept light on that summer night. Just 50 buildings lined the crooked main street: saloon, mercantile, church, livery. Each one wooden bones dried by months without rain. The earth cracked under every step. The creek itself had withered to a dull thread, glinting faintly like broken glass. Above the town, the ridges loomed dark, holding back nothing but wind. That wind carried a scent sharp and uneasy: dry hay, pine pitch, and silence brittle enough to snap. The barns east of town, stacked with grain and whiskey barrels, were heavy with stillness. They were the heart of Copper Creek's survival, and hearts, when struck, can burst. On the stable steps sat Jace Callahan, 38, hat tipped low. His frame was lean but strong, shaped by saddle years and nights too long to count. A beard shadowed his jaw, storm-gray eyes half hidden, yet restless, scanning horizons as if expecting judgment to ride in. His shirt clung with dust and sweat, boots scuffed, hands scarred with rope burns and old regrets. The town remembered him less kindly. They saw a drifter who once gambled too deep, fought too quick, and carried his father's sins like a brand on his back. They let him shoe horses, mend fences, haul hay, but never trusted him past their doorframes. Yet Jace stayed, maybe out of stubbornness, maybe because every exile must return somewhere. He bore it with silence, though silence often weighed heavier than chains. Out beyond, circling the ridges, a chestnut mustang known as Rust roamed untamed. Folks said no rope could hold him, no rider last. To Jace, Rust was more than rumor. He was a reflection, scarred, mistrusted, yet still free. The ground shuddered with a muffled crack, like thunder swallowed underground. Then, an eruption. The eastern barns blasted open, wood and flame surging skyward in a roar that tore the valley's silence to shreds. Jace was running before thought found him. Across the street, windows burst with light, townsfolk spilling out, voices shrill with panic. The church bell clanged wild as boys yanked the rope, summoning salvation that never came fast enough. Orange fire leapt roof to roof. Horses reared, eyes rolling, reins snapping. Cattle thundered against fences. Then a sharper cry cut through, the sound of children, high and trapped. The schoolhouse, wedged beside, the barns had caught. Smoke poured from its roof, windows glowing with terrified faces. Small hands pressed against glass, mouths opening, but swallowed by flame's roar. Jace's coat was off in a breath, wrapped around his mouth. Shouts followed him, warnings, disbelief, curses, but he didn't stop. He shouldered the schoolhouse door, The heat bit through fabric, the smoke clawed his lungs. Inside was a storm of fire, beams groaning, children huddled and weeping. He gathered two, one in his arms, another by the collar, and drove them toward the door. Light broke like salvation as he stumbled them into the night. Mothers clutched them, screams of relief drowned by the fire's hunger. But one cry lingered. At the back wall, a little girl lay crumpled, curls damp with sweat, a ragged doll clenched in her hand. She was still, too still. Jace's chest tore with urgency. He crossed the choking dark, lifted her fragile body, her small head lolling against his chest. The ceiling moaned above him, timbers ready to fall. He ran, lungs on fire, vision blurring, until daylight blazed again. The crowd gasped. Callahan, the outcast, cradling innocence in his arms. On the ridge above, Rust appeared against the firelit sky. His chestnut coat glowed with sparks, black mane lashing. He reared high, a wild cry ripping the night. For a heartbeat, the blaze seemed to pause, as if even the fire listened. That cry echoed Jace's own struggle, untamed, defiant, pleading with the world to remember that even in ruin there can be redemption. But Jace's body betrayed him. His knees buckled, strength drained. He sank into the dirt, the girl limp in his arms, her ragged doll slipping from her fingers. Smoke coiled tighter, sparks showered like judgment from the heavens. The townsfolk stood frozen, not rushing forward, not daring yet to believe in him. Above them, Rust's call shattered the night again, wilder, louder, as if daring the valley to choose. And Jace collapsed fully, his face lost to the dirt, flames raging higher. The night still burned behind Jace's eyelids. He remembered the girl in his arms, the smoke choking him, Rust's wild cry cutting through the fire. Then darkness. When he opened his eyes again, he was not in the blaze, but in the middle of the town square, the dawn sun throwing pale light across blackened ruins. He was on his knees, hat fallen, hands ash-stained, the girl no longer in his arms. She had been carried away to safety by trembling townsfolk. Around him, a circle of faces had gathered, but they were not faces of gratitude. They were faces of suspicion. "Where were you before the barns caught?" a man barked. His name was Eli Mercer, the cooper, heavy-set and red-faced from sleepless nights. He jabbed a finger. "I seen you skulking near the grain stacks yesterday. Don't think we all forgot what Callahan blood means." Jace's throat was raw from smoke, his voice low. "I was nowhere near when it started." But whispers spread like wind through dry grass. The fire had ended, but another blaze, one of rumor, took its place. From the back of the crowd stepped Ruby Monroe, 32, widow of 2 winters. She carried herself tall, though grief had slimmed her frame. Auburn hair was pinned neatly under a dark kerchief, her eyes steady hazel, sharp as if they'd seen too much loss to be fooled by gossip. Her plain gray dress and worn shawl marked her as one who lived modestly, yet there was strength in her presence. She spoke above the murmurs. "He saved children. You all saw him." Some shifted uncomfortably, yet suspicion clung stubborn. By midday the mayor himself strode out. Mayor Silas Hargrove was a man in his late 50s, tall, with a broad frame padded by years of comfort. His black waistcoat strained at the buttons, gold watch chain gleaming in the sun. He wore a politician's smile, meant to calm, but sharp at the edges. He raised his voice. "Copper Creek has lost too much to let shadows linger. A fire this size, barns, whiskey, grain, it cannot be accident. And when accident cannot explain, we must look at the one man who always brings trouble." Eyes turned on Jace. The mayor's words had the weight of law, even without proof. Ruby stepped closer to Jace's side. "This is wrong, Silas. You jail the only man who went into that blaze?" But a cry came from the crowd, cutting her off. "I saw him!" The shout belonged to Hank Dobson, a farmhand barely 20, lanky with straw blonde hair sticking from under his cap. His skin was freckled raw from sun, his voice cracking with fear or guilt. It was hard to tell. "I saw Callahan near the East Barns last evening, right before sundown. He was pacing by the doors, gasps, murmurs, eyes narrowing at Jace like knives." Jace's jaw tightened. "I wasn't near the barns after noon." "You're lying, boy." But Hank's trembling hand lifted as if swearing. "I swear on my mother's grave." The crowd roared, suspicion now, fed by supposed witness. Ruby's face hardened, but her voice was steady. "Or maybe you saw what you wanted. Maybe someone put those words in your mouth." Mayor Hargrove seized the moment. His voice thundered, "Enough. Until this matter is cleared, Jace Callahan will be held under guard. He'll answer for the fire before the law." Jace felt the circle closing. Hands moved to seize him. He could fight. His body was still strong, but against all of Copper Creek, fists would not clear his name. He met the mayor's cold eyes. "I saved your children." Hargrove's mouth twitched into something between a smile and sneer. "And yet, fire followed you." "It always does." Ruby stepped forward, blocking their reach. "You'll arrest him after what he did? Shame on you." The crowd shifted, torn between her courage and their fear. Jace straightened, tall despite exhaustion. "If you bind me, do it with the truth in your hands, not rumor." But truth was drowned by fear. The sheriff moved forward, rope in hand. That was when a new sound cut the air. From the edge of town came the pounding of hooves. Out of the haze trotted Rust, chestnut hide streaked with soot from the night's fire, mane tossing wild. He halted in the square, eyes blazing amber in the sunlight. The mustang reared, front hooves striking the air, a scream tearing the morning open. It was not the sound of fear, but of challenge. Sparks seemed to leap again, though no fire burned now. The crowd fell silent, frozen between awe and dread. Rust's call echoed off every wall of Copper Creek like a verdict yet unspoken. And Jace, standing bound in suspicion, felt the cry shiver through his chest. Rust's cry still echoed in the square when the crowd finally broke apart. Suspicion lingered like smoke, but the Mustang's defiance had unsettled them. The sheriff lowered his rope, muttering curses under his breath. Ruby Monroe seized the moment, whispering to Jace, "Come with me, before they change their minds." She gripped his arm and pulled him away, skirts brushing the ash-stained dirt. In the confusion, no one stopped them. They moved fast through alleys shadowed by dawn. Ruby's breath came sharp, but her stride was steady. Jace followed without a word until they slipped into the shell of the burned barn at the edge of town. Inside, the air was thick with the stench of charred timber and spilled whiskey. Roof beams sagged overhead, blackened and brittle, but the place held pockets of shadow deep enough to hide a fugitive. Ruby turned to face him. Ash streaked her cheek, her hazel eyes fierce. "You can't go back to the square. Not now. They'll twist every word against you." Jace leaned against a scorched beam, weary but unbroken. "Running only proves them right." Her voice softened, though her jaw stayed firm. "Then find what proves them wrong." As if summoned by her words, something caught Jace's eye amid the rubble. He crouched and lifted a blackened scrap of fabric half buried in ash. The cloth was scorched, but not destroyed. On one corner clung a stitched insignia, a circle with crossed spurs, faint but unmistakable. Jace's hand tightened. He knew that mark. It belonged to Barrett Cole, the wealthiest landowner in 3 counties, A man in his mid-50s with a hawk's nose and calculating eyes. Years ago, Barrett had tried to drive Jace's family off their ranch, seizing land acre by acre until only ashes remained. Their feud had never cooled. He showed Ruby, her face paled. "If that belongs to Cole—" "It does," Jace said, his voice flat as steel. "And it means this fire wasn't chance." The discovery burned hotter than the flames around them. It was a thread, small, fragile, but one that could unravel everything. A sudden sound stirred outside. Hooves. Russ stepped into the ruin, chestnut hide catching faint beams of light through broken rafters. The Mustang lowered his head, snorting, then turned toward the barn's rear where debris lay piled high. Jace frowned. "What is it, boy?" Rust pawed at the ground, nostrils flaring. His amber eyes fixed on Jace, urgent, insistent. Ruby watched in awe. "He wants you to follow." The horse pressed against a half-collapsed wall. Beneath the rubble, a narrow stairwell descended into darkness. The fire had not reached this far. Jace exchanged a glance with Ruby. "Looks like the Mustang knows more than half this town." They pushed aside charred planks until the opening gaped wide enough to slip through. The air below was heavy, damp, and smelled of oil. A lantern still burned weakly, half smothered by smoke. The cellar stretched longer than expected, lined with barrels and crates. But something was wrong. Several casks had split, dark liquid seeping into the dirt. Jace crouched and dipped his fingers. The scent stung sharp. Not whiskey. Kerosene. Ruby covered her mouth. So that's how the fire spread so fast. The barrels were not accident. They were fuel, and someone had placed them here on purpose. Jace's chest tightened. The scrap of cloth in his pocket, the kerosene in the cellar, together they painted a picture darker than any rumor. Rust stamped his hoof, the sound echoing through the chamber. Ruby's face hardened. "Barrett Cole owns half the land around here. If he burns what he doesn't own, he forces the rest to sell for nothing." Jace nodded grimly. "That's his game. Always has been. Fire is just another tool." She looked at him, voice steady despite fear. "Then you have to show this to the town." Jace shook his head. "Not yet. Not while Hargrove's in Cole's pocket. They'll bury this cellar before sunrise." They stood in silence, the weight of truth pressing heavy. Above, the ruined barn groaned, timbers shifting. Ash sifted down like black snow. Russ stayed close, muscles tense, ears twitching at every sound. Jace turned to Ruby. "You've done enough bringing me here. If they find you, I'm already marked by standing at your side," she said, voice low but fierce. "If they think I'm guilty with you, so be it." For the first time since the fire began, Jace's expression softened. The world had cast him out, but here was someone who still believed. Then from above came the crunch of boots on charred wood. Slow, deliberate, not the sheriff's stumble, nor the town's nervous shuffle. These steps carried purpose. Jace froze, listening. Another sound followed. The scrape of a match. Light flared briefly through the cracks in the floor. Voices murmured low. He knew that voice. Barrett Cole. And with him, the heavy tread of men, loyal not to law, but to money. Ruby's hand found Jace's arm. Rust tossed his head, ears flat, ready for danger. Jace whispered, "They've been following since the square." The steps drew closer, circling above the cellar door. Dust drifted down, each grain like a ticking clock. The trap was sprung, and there was no easy way out. The footsteps above grew heavier, each creak of the charred floorboards a warning. Dust sifted down in slow streams, and Ruby's hand tightened on Jace's arm. They had been found. A sharp kick splintered what remained of the cellar door. Lantern light flared, casting long shadows into the underground chamber. Barrett Cole stepped down first, broad-shouldered, tall, with iron-gray hair slicked neatly back. His face, carved by years of control and ambition, bore a cruel calm. At 55, he was dressed too fine for the ruin. Black coat unscathed, boots polished, silver buckle gleaming. His presence made the cellar feel smaller, the air heavier. Behind him followed 3 men, rough and armed, ranch hands turned enforcers. One carried a length of chain, another a club. Their eyes held no doubt, only loyalty to the man who paid their wages. Barrett's voice was smooth, mocking. "Well, Callahan, you've a talent for crawling through ashes. A shame it won't save you." Now Jay stepped forward, shoulders squared. "You set that fire." A faint smile touched Barrett's lips. "Finally, you're catching up." He glanced at the broken barrels, the kerosene seeping into dirt. "You see, land is like livestock. Some must be culled so the rest may grow. These barns, this town, they burn, and I buy what's left for pennies." Ruby's eyes blazed. "You endangered children." Barrett's expression did not shift. "Collateral. Nothing more." The word struck like a slap. Jace lunged, fury carrying him into Barrett's men. Fists met bone, the cellar erupting in chaos. One man's chain swung, missing Jace's head by an inch, clanging against stone. Jace struck back, elbow hard into another's gut, but numbers wore him down. A club slammed across his back. Another blow to his ribs stole his breath. He staggered, fists bloody, until Barrett himself stepped forward. The older man's punch was precise, cold, catching Jace square in the jaw. Jace hit the ground, vision swimming. Above, a shrill cry split the night. Rust. The mustang had not fled. With a thunder of hooves, the horse crashed through the weakened wall of the barn. Splinters flew as Rust burst into the cellar's edge, mane whipping like fire. His chestnut body slammed into one of Barrett's men, hurling him against stone. The others scattered, curses breaking their confidence. Barrett snarled, pulling a pistol from beneath his coat. Rust reared, hooves striking down, forcing Barrett back. Dust filled the chamber, a storm of ash and fury. Jay struggled to his knees, blood at his lip, eyes fixed on the pistol. In the confusion, Barrett's voice rose, shouting over the chaos. "This town was mine before the Callahans fouled it. I burned it to the ground, and I'll do it again until Copper Creek bends." The confession hung heavy in the smoke, undeniable. Ruby's face turned pale, horror and vindication battling in her eyes. Jace clenched his fists, tighter. Finally, truth spoken aloud, but only in this cellar, only before enemies. One of Barrett's men recovered, grabbing Ruby from behind. She cried out, struggling, but the chain coiled around her arms pinned her fast. The club pressed against her side, forcing stillness. Barrett straightened, pistol steady, voice sharp. "Enough. Callahan, hear me well. Stay silent about what you found, or this widow pays the price. One word, and her grave will be dug before dawn." Jace's chest heaved. Rage roared through him, but the sight of Ruby bound, her hazel eyes wide with defiance yet rimmed with fear, forced his fists to still. Russ stamped furiously, ready to strike again, but Jace lifted a hand, trembling. "Don't." Barrett's smile returned, cruel and assured. "That's better." The cellar burned with silence, broken only by Ruby's sharp breaths and Rust's restless pawing. Barrett lowered his pistol, then raised his voice as if addressing the whole town above. "Tonight was only the beginning. If Copper Creek refuses me again, I'll torch every last row of houses, every last store, until nothing remains but ash. Then we'll see how cheaply desperation sells." The menace was colder than the flames had ever been. He gestured to his men, dragging Ruby toward the stairs. "Bring her." Let Callahan stew in silence. Jace pushed himself upright, ribs screaming. "Barrett!" His voice tore through the cellar. "You'll never own Copper Creek." Barrett glanced back, smirk carved in stone. "By dawn, I already will." The cellar door slammed above, leaving Jace in shadow, battered and breathless. Rust pressed close, eyes blazing. Through the cracks in the floor came the fading echo of Barrett's command. "Set fire to the rest." Outside, the sound of torches flaring filled the night. The town of Copper Creek stood on the edge of obliteration. The last words from above still rang in Jace's ears. "Set fire to the rest." Outside, torches hissed to life, and the glow of new flames licked at the night sky. Copper Creek teetered on the edge of ruin. Jace staggered from the cellar, bruised and bleeding, rust pressing at his side like a living shield. Smoke drifted through the alleys, shouts rising as Barrett's men carried fire into the town's heart. The main street was chaos. Roof lines glowed red, sparks leaping across shingles. Families ran with buckets, children crying, horses screaming in their stalls. Amid the din, Barrett strode at the head of his men, his black coat stark against the inferno. His pistol gleamed in firelight, his voice a whip. "Drive them out! Burn it all!" Behind him, Ruby stumbled, hands bound, face pale with soot. The chain that held her bit into her wrists, but her eyes remained fierce, locked on Jace as if willing him to stand. Jace's chest burned with rage, but his ribs ached with every breath. He turned to the people he had once called neighbors, those who had doubted him hours earlier. "You can fight the flames, or you can fight the man who lit them. The choice is yours." For a heartbeat, the crowd wavered. Old Eli Mercer, the cooper who had accused Jace first, stepped forward, his broad shoulders hunched with age, his hands calloused. "If he burns our town, none of us got a home left." One by one, others followed, men with axes, women with buckets, even children carrying blankets soaked in water. A rumble of voices rose, no longer whispers of suspicion, but shouts of defiance. Barrett sneered. "You'll turn on me? After all I've given? After all you've taken?" Eli spat. The line was drawn. Barrett barked an order. His men dragged Ruby toward a burning shed, intending to trap her inside. Flames roared higher, timbers groaning. Rust exploded into motion. The Mustang thundered down the alley, muscles rippling. With a leap that split the smoke, he crashed onto the collapsing roof, hooves striking sparks as the boards caved. He landed inside the blaze, scattering embers like stars. Ruby shielded her face, coughing, until Russ shoved against her with his flank, urging her upward. With desperate strength, she clung to his mane. In one breathtaking surge, Rust vaulted through the failing rafters, carrying her clear as the shed collapsed in a storm of fire. The crowd gasped, awed into silence. Ruby slid free, landing hard on the dirt but alive, chains broken by the fall. Tears streaked her soot-stained cheeks as she pressed a hand to Rust's neck. "You saved me?" Barrett's face twisted, fury breaking through his mask of control. The air filled with battle cries. Townsfolk surged forward, clashing with Barrett's men in the street. Buckets of water doused flames, while fists and tools struck against weapons. The square became a storm of fire and struggle, loyalty tested in the heat of survival. Jace fought, at the center, trading blows with ranch hands, his battered body moving on sheer will. Barrett advanced toward him, pistol raised. "You should have stayed down, Callahan," Barrett snarled, "and let you own what isn't yours." Jace's voice cracked with smoke. "Not tonight." The two men collided, fists and fury replacing bullets. Barrett was older but strong, years of power hardening his frame. His fists were heavy, precise. Jace blocked, countered, but his ribs screamed with every strike. Barrett forced him to his knees, pressing the pistol's barrel to his temple. The crowd froze, gasps breaking through the roar of fire. "Watch your hero fall," Barrett spat, voice triumphant. For a heartbeat, it seemed the fight was lost. Then Ruby cried out, voice raw but unyielding. "He saved your children!" "And you'd let Barrett bury them in ash?" Her words cut through the smoke. Faces hardened, tools lifted. With a roar, the townsfolk surged as one. They struck at Barrett's men, overwhelming them with sheer numbers. A bucket smashed across the pistol, sending it skittering across the dirt. Barrett staggered back, rage twisting his face as fists and boots pressed him down. Jace rose again, breath ragged, and with the town at his side, drove Barrett to the ground. The once feared land baron fell beneath the weight of those he had sought to destroy. The flames still raged, though the fight was won. Jace stood in the square, shoulders trembling, soot clinging to every inch of him. He swayed, the heat of the fire licking his skin, his clothes scorched nearly through. Ruby ran toward him, but too late. Jace dropped to his knees, his whole body quaking, eyes dimming. His charred hands pressed to the dirt, smoke curling from his back. The town's cheers faltered into silence, and then he collapsed, motionless, firelight flickering across a body that seemed too broken to rise again. The square was silent after the storm. Jace lay collapsed, his body charred by smoke and flame, his strength gone. Around him, the townsfolk stood in shock, their cheers for victory dying into whispers. Ruby dropped to her knees beside him, pressing his head against her chest, praying for breath where none seemed to come. Russ stood over them, mane singed, eyes burning like embers that refused to fade. For a long moment, it seemed the fire had claimed its final victim. Then, a cough. Weak, rattling, but alive. By the time dawn crested over the ridges, the flames had been beaten back. Black smoke curled upward, chased by pale light. The town smelled of wet ash and ruin. Families stood among what remained of their homes, some walls still smoldering, others collapsed entirely. Yet in the broken streets there was also relief, because the man they had nearly condemned had survived the night. Jace stirred on a cot hastily carried into the church hall. His face was blistered, beard streaked with soot, but his eyes opened to find Ruby sitting close, her hand clasping his. Rust's massive form filled the doorway, refusing to leave, his flanks scarred but proud. Ruby's hazel eyes shone with tears and resolve. "You're still here." Jace managed a cracked smile. "I told you, I don't fall easy." The words were rough, but they drew a murmur of relief from those gathered. For the first time, the people of Copper Creek looked at him not with suspicion, but with gratitude. Mayor Hargrove stepped forward, his fine coat torn, his face gray from smoke. He looked smaller now, his authority burned down to ash with the Barnes. For a long while he said nothing, until his voice broke. "We were wrong." The words rippled through the hall. Men who had shouted for Jace's arrest the day before now lowered their heads. Women who had whispered blame wiped tears from their cheeks. Old Eli Mercer, who had pointed his finger first, placed a calloused hand on Jace's shoulder. "You saved our young ones when none of us dared." Jace's eyes flicked across the faces, weary but steady. This town doesn't belong to Barrett Cole, and it sure as hell doesn't belong to fear. If you want to rise, you'll have to do it together. The hall filled with nods. For the first time, Copper Creek was united. Later, when the crowd had dispersed to start clearing rubble, Ruby lingered, She reached into the folds of her soot-stained shawl and pulled free a folded envelope, edges worn and yellowed with time. Her hands trembled as she placed it on Jace's chest. "It was my husband's," she whispered. "Before he passed, he left me this. Said one day I'd know who it was meant for." Jace frowned, his scarred fingers tracing the faded ink. He opened it carefully. The letter inside bore words written in a steady hand. "Ruby, when the day comes that fire threatens and hope falters, trust the man who dares to walk into the flames. He will not, only save others. He will save you." Jace's throat tightened. His storm-gray eyes flicked to Ruby, who was fighting tears. "My husband believed in a man like you," she said, "and now I do too." As the sun climbed, Copper Creek stirred with purpose. Ash was shoveled, walls propped, buckets hauled. Children carried bricks in tiny hands. Women patched cloth for makeshift roofs. Men raised beams where houses had fallen. Every strike of hammer against wood was a defiance against despair. Jace, though weakened, limped among them, offering guidance. Rust followed faithfully, nudging beams into place, his presence a reminder of strength untamed yet loyal. When townsfolk faltered, his cry spurred them on, a wild hymn echoing through the valley. The mistrust that once divided them was gone. In its place was unity, forged in fire. At midday, Ruby stepped onto the square with Jace at her side, Rust standing tall. She raised her voice, carrying over the clatter of work. "We can build again, but not just houses. We must build trust and courage and the will to stand together." Jace showed us that the people cheered, not for buildings, but for hope. Where ashes smoldered, foundations were laid. Where walls had fallen, hearts rose. From that day, Copper Creek no longer whispered Jace's name in shame. They spoke it with pride, and Rust, the mustang who refused to bow, became the town's guardian in legend and in truth. As the sun dipped, painting the valley gold, Jace stood at the ridge with Ruby at his side. Rust pawed the earth beside them, mane glowing in the light. Below, Copper Creek stirred with hammer and laughter, children chasing each other through the soot. Jace breathed deep, the pain still sharp in his body, but softened by the sight. "Funny thing about fire," he murmured. "It destroys, but it also clears the ground for new life." Ruby slipped her hand into his. "And sometimes it forges what was meant to last." They stood in silence, the wind carrying the smell of ash now mingled with fresh-cut wood. Rust lifted his head, eyes reflecting the horizon, as if already watching over what was yet to come. Together, they stepped forward into the new road. In the ashes of Copper Creek, we saw more than fire. We saw what happens when fear divides, and what rises when courage unites. A drifter once cast aside became a protector. A widow's faith lit the way when the night was darkest. And a wild mustang, untamed and free, reminded us that strength isn't in chains. It's in standing tall together. Sometimes life's trials burn everything we thought we knew. But from the smoke, we can choose to build again. Stronger, kinder, and closer than before. If this story touched you, share a word with us in the comments. Let us know where you're watching from. And if you'd like to walk with us through the next trail, subscribe, so no ember of the journey is ever lost.